History often gives us figures who are remembered for their brilliance, their nobility, or their great military victories. Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin was remembered for none of those things. Instead, he carried into the glittering courts of Imperial Russia the smell of sweat, unwashed clothes, and an aura of scandal that seemed to cling to him as persistently as the dirt under his fingernails. Yet, somehow, this man, unkempt, wild-eyed, and openly offensive to the polished sensibilities of the aristocracy, carved out a place at the very heart of Russian power. Rasputin's strategy, if we can call it that, was as shocking as it was effective. Where others wore perfumes and silks, he wore grime and wool. Where courtiers practiced eloquence, he mumbled in half-coherent riddles about God and sin. He did not hide his appetites for food, drink, or women. Instead, he flaunted them, insisting that the path to salvation ran through the indulgence of sin itself. To a society steeped in rigid manners and suffocating protocol, his filth became a kind of grotesque charisma. Many observers at the time described Rasputin as revolting, yet magnetic. His tall, gaunt figure and piercing, almost predatory eyes unsettled those who looked at him, but few could look away. The filth, the smell, the disregard for etiquette, all of it set him apart in a court obsessed with appearances. He became a curiosity, and from curiosity grew fascination. But Rasputin was not the first to play this role in Russian culture. Long before him, Russia had produced a tradition of so-called holy men, wandering mystics, ascetics, and fools for Christ, who rejected worldly cleanliness and order as distractions from the divine. These figures, often found in remote villages or cloisters, commanded respect by living on the margins of society. Rasputin, consciously or unconsciously, tapped into this archetype. He became the peasant prophet who defied convention, a man whose outward filth supposedly reflected inward holiness. What made Rasputin different from the wandering hermits of folk tradition, however, was his ability to exploit the hunger of Russia's elite for something they could not find in their own rigid world. By the early 1900s, the Russian aristocracy was restless. The empire was strained by inequality. The church had grown formal and uninspiring, and the nobility often sought novelty in spiritualism, seances, and exotic mysticism. They craved something raw, something outside the sterile rituals of high society. Rasputin offered exactly that. His methods of seduction were strange yet effective. Witnesses often described how his voice would drop into a low, almost hypnotic rhythm when he spoke. His gaze was unwavering, making those who met his eyes feel simultaneously exposed and enthralled. For women, especially, Rasputin couched his advances in religious metaphor, telling them that physical union with him could bring them closer to God, that by embracing sin, they could cleanse their souls. It was a theology tailored to justify his appetites, yet astonishingly persuasive to those who yearned for both spiritual and physical liberation. Stories circulated of Rasputin's late-night gatherings, where candlelight flickered across crowded rooms filled with whispering prayers that dissolved into moans of ecstasy. These ceremonies blurred the lines between worship and debauchery, leaving participants convinced they had touched something beyond the ordinary world. Critics saw blasphemy, but devotees saw divine fire. It was this strange power, a mixture of disgust, charisma, and manipulation, that propelled Rasputin upward. From obscure Siberian peasant, he became the center of whispers in St. Petersburg salons. Aristocrats invited him not just out of curiosity, but out of a secret desire to be shocked, to feel alive in his presence. His enemies mocked him as the mad monk, though he was never truly a monk. But the more they mocked, the more he became infamous, and infamy drew attention. Step by step, Rasputin moved closer to the heart of Russian politics. The court tolerated him as a bizarre ornament of high society, a wild curiosity to be laughed at in private. Yet behind the laughter was unease, for Rasputin's presence had a way of unsettling the order of things. He was unpredictable, and in that unpredictability lay the seeds of influence. The stage was now set for the most critical encounter of his life. His gaze, his filth, and his strange theology had already conquered the salons and boudoirs of St. Petersburg. But soon he would meet the woman who would make him more than just a scandalous sideshow. That woman was Alexandra, the Tsarina of Russia, and through her, Rasputin would grasp the very levers of imperial power. When Rasputin first crossed the gilded gates of the Winter Palace, he did not look like a man destined to shape an empire. His beard was wild, his boots worn, his coat still carrying the dust of the provinces. He looked more like a wandering peasant who had taken a wrong turn than a holy advisor. But within those walls, he found his greatest believer, Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, wife of Tsar Nicholas II. For Alexandra, Rasputin was not just another mystic or charlatan. He was a lifeline. The Romanovs had a terrible secret. Their only son and heir, Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, a condition that left him vulnerable to uncontrolled bleeding. Every fall, every bruise, even the smallest injury could threaten his life. The royal doctors could offer little beyond despair. Alexandra, tormented by her inability to protect her child, turned to faith, prayer, and any figure who promised hope. When Rasputin appeared, she believed she had found God's messenger. The stories spread quickly. In moments when Alexei lay fevered and near death, Rasputin was summoned. He would pray, sometimes whispering softly at the boy's bedside, sometimes standing at a distance and sending letters filled with blessings. Again and again, to Alexandra's astonishment, the child would recover. Whether through coincidence, natural remission, or the calming effect Rasputin had on the anxious empress, the results convinced her. Rasputin was a miracle worker. From that moment, Alexandra saw him not as a filthy peasant, but as a divine instrument chosen to save her son, and by extension, the Russian throne. Her letters to Nicholas were filled with praise for our friend, as she called him. She defended Rasputin against every accusation, dismissing the rumors of drunkenness and debauchery as slander from jealous courtiers. To question Rasputin was, in her eyes, to question God's providence. The Tsarina's devotion gave Rasputin unprecedented access to the levers of power. He was not a minister, nor a general, nor a scholar. Yet his words carried weight in court decisions, in the appointment of bishops, even in the selection of cabinet members. Politicians who sought favor with Alexandra sought Rasputin first, hoping that his whispered endorsement would open doors. His influence was hidden yet pervasive, like a shadow cast across the empire. This new reality infuriated the Russian aristocracy. To them, it was unthinkable that a man of such humble origins, and worse, such scandalous reputation, should dictate affairs of state. They whispered of orgies, of bribes, of drunken brawls in the back streets of St. Petersburg. They painted Rasputin as a corrupter not only of the court, but of Russia itself. Caricatures in underground pamphlets depicted him with leering eyes and grasping hands, clutching at both the throne and the Tsarina. Yet Alexandra refused to listen. The more the nobility attacked Rasputin, the more she clung to him. Their hatred, she believed, only proved that he was righteous, that he alone stood against the poisonous intrigues of the court. To her, Rasputin was not just her son's savior. He was Russia's spiritual shield. But the truth was darker. Rasputin thrived in the chaos of war and revolution that gripped the empire. As World War I raged, Nicholas II took command at the front, leaving Alexandra to oversee the government in his absence. And in her reliance on Rasputin, she often allowed his voice to guide her. Ministers rose and fell at his suggestion. Military appointments were influenced by his approval. Corruption deepened as opportunists sought his blessing. The result was devastating. While Russian soldiers froze and starved in the trenches, the capital buzzed with rumors of Rasputin's excesses. Bread lines grew longer, strikes spread, and faith in the monarchy crumbled. To the people, Rasputin became the symbol of everything rotten in the imperial regime: the decay, the corruption, the blindness of rulers insulated from their suffering. In private, Rasputin seemed to sense his precarious position. He spoke of death often, warning Alexandra that if he were killed by nobles, it would spell doom for the monarchy within 2 years. Whether this was genuine prophecy or clever manipulation, the words lodged themselves deeply in her mind. She believed him utterly. As 1916 drew to a close, discontent hardened into conspiracy. Members of the aristocracy, once loyal to the throne, now saw Rasputin as a poison that had to be removed if the monarchy were to survive. They plotted in whispers, planning his assassination not only as an act of political necessity, but as a kind of exorcism, a cleansing of Russia's soul. And so the stage was set. Rasputin, the Siberian peasant who rose through filth, scandal, and charisma to become the most powerful man in Russia, now walked unknowingly toward his violent end. Yet in his fall lay not salvation, but the final unraveling of a dynasty. By late 1916, the empire trembled. Russia was bleeding on the front lines of the Great War, and at home hunger and despair stalked the streets. Factories closed, bread riots flared, and the capital buzzed with mutinous whispers. Yet inside the glittering palaces of St. Petersburg, the court seemed blind. The one figure at the center of every rumor, every whispered curse, was not the Tsar or the Tsarina, but the monk from Siberia, Grigory Rasputin. The nobility had decided enough was enough. To them, Rasputin was not merely a scandal. He was a disease eating away at the legitimacy of the monarchy. They feared that as long as he lived, the Romanovs would be chained to his shadow, and Russia would sink deeper into chaos. And so, in the waning days of December, a conspiracy was born. The ringleader was Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the richest men in the empire, married to the Tsar's niece. To him, Rasputin represented not only a national disgrace, but a personal insult. How could a peasant dictate the fate of noble bloodlines? Beside him stood Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, cousin to Nicholas II, and a small circle of officers and politicians. They convinced themselves that killing Rasputin would save the monarchy. What they did not see was that the monarchy itself was already beyond saving. The plot was woven in secrecy, with layers of deception worthy of a play. Yusupov invited Rasputin to his palace on the night of December 29th, under the pretense of meeting his young wife. It was bait no man in Rasputin's position could resist, a chance to bask in the company of nobility, to revel in the illusion that he was their equal. Rasputin, flattered and unsuspecting, agreed. That winter night, St. Petersburg was locked in silence, the river frozen, the city cloaked in snow. Rasputin arrived at the Yusupov palace in his long peasant coat, led down to a lavishly decorated basement dining room. There, a table was laid with cakes and wine, glittering in candlelight. The conspirators had laced them with cyanide, confident that even a small taste would end his life. Rasputin ate, he drank, he laughed, and nothing happened. The conspirators watched in mounting horror as the poison seemed powerless against him. Yusupov later described how Rasputin chewed the cakes with relish, gulped down glass after glass of poisoned wine, and merely grew more animated, his piercing eyes glowing in the candlelight. Hours passed, and still he lived. Panic set in. Finally, Yusupov, trembling, fetched a revolver. He raised the weapon and fired point-blank into Rasputin's chest. The monk collapsed in a heap. The conspirators exhaled, convinced the nightmare was over, but it was not. When Yusupov bent over the body, Rasputin's eyes snapped open. With a guttural cry, he leapt to his feet, clawing his way toward the door. He staggered up the stairs, blood soaking his tunic, and burst into the snowy courtyard. For a moment, it seemed as though no weapon could kill him, that he truly was what his followers claimed, a man chosen by God, untouchable by mortal hands. The conspirators pursued, their fear now mingled with desperation. Grand Duke Dmitri seized the revolver and fired again. Bullets tore into Rasputin's body. At last he fell into the snow, thrashing, then slowly growing still. To ensure the deed was done, they bound his body and dragged it to the frozen Neva River. There, under cover of night, they pried open the ice and cast him into the black water. 3 days later, his corpse was found. Autopsy reports suggested he had water in his lungs, meaning that even after the poison and the bullets, Rasputin may have still been alive when he sank beneath the ice. The conspirators congratulated themselves, believing they had saved Russia from the influence of a dangerous mystic. Instead, they had only deepened the cracks in the throne they sought to protect. Alexandra was inconsolable, convinced that with Rasputin's death, the monarchy was cursed. Nicholas raged at the betrayal of his own family members, but his anger could not undo the damage. The prophecy Rasputin had whispered came true. Within months of his murder, the Romanovs themselves were swept away by revolution. To the people, Rasputin's death became another symbol of the decay of the old world. Some saw him as a devil finally slain, others as a martyr destroyed by jealous nobles. In both cases, his legend only grew. The man who refused to die, who seemed immune to poison and bullets, passed into myth. And so Rasputin's story ended, not with the peace of a holy man, but with violence in the snow. A fitting finale for a figure who embodied Russia's turmoil. His corpse sank into the Neva, but his shadow lingered, a ghostly reminder of how superstition, desperation, and power can entwine to bring down empires. Thank you for joining us on this dramatic journey through the life of Rasputin, a man whose shadow still lingers over Russian history. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to give this video a like to support the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next hidden chapter of history we uncover. Every like, comment, and subscription from you is the greatest motivation for us to continue bringing powerful, emotional, and eye-opening stories from the past. We'll see you in the next episode.